Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the iPhone 5C and see how this particular iPhone holds up in 2024. Now, the thing I will definitely tell you about this particular iPhone is that I really don't think anybody should be buying this type of iPhone anymore. It makes zero sense at all, and you are much better off buying an iPhone that is still even kind of supported with software. Things like the iPhone 10 is way better than this thing, but the iPhone 10R and above are the iPhones I would 100% recommend buying. So keep those in mind. I really don't think anybody should be buying the iPhone 5C when it comes down to it, but it's still a very interesting iPhone to take a look at because this iPhone at one point was a pretty big deal to Apple, and it was kind of their first foray into these cheaper iPhones, which I was actually very happy to see. But if you want to pick up some iPhones that I would recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the iPhone 5C, well, actually the concept of this particular iPhone, this was an iPhone that Apple made, which was a cheaper rendition of their main flagship they were selling. So it was kind of like the iPhone SE lineup before the SE lineup actually came out. The thing with the iPhone 5C though was that this wasn't taking cheaper parts of the iPhone 5S and giving us like an iPhone 5S type of phone. It was making a cheaper iPhone 5. That was kind of what was going on there. But the problem with this iPhone price tag wise was that it was the same, it was actually more expensive in the brand new market than a used iPhone 5 at that time. So it didn't even make any sense to buy this iPhone when you could buy a used iPhone 5, which was better than this iPhone, physically, and you can just buy that iPhone, all day, every day. So that was just an interesting thing. On the front of this particular phone though, you were getting a 4-inch IPS LCD panel. It was 640p and it honestly was not that bad of a display. It still looks okay it's an okay looking panel for how old this phone is. It's a 2013 device, so it's 11 years old. It definitely doesn't seem that bad. You're getting the top bezel and the bottom bezel as well. And I do think if you had to, you could still use this, display. It's definitely not a terrible display though, but you can definitely tell it's a much older looking phone than a lot of devices nowadays. And that's just kind of what's happening when you're getting this type of product. I mean, you kind of know what you're getting. And I would definitely say this would be one of the bigger downsides of getting this type of phone is that the display just really isn't that great. Now you're also not getting a fingerprint sensor on this iPhone, on this iPhone. This was one of the last iPhones to not have a fingerprint sensor, which was pretty crazy. So you were missing out on the Touch ID sensor, no Face ID, no nothing like that. So there's no biometric locking. It's just all just the passcodes you can type in. The sides though was interesting because it was actually not a flat-sided phone, but it was kind of like a flat-sided device when it came down to it. So it was flat curved a little bit, which was kind of interesting. On the bottom, you're getting a lightning port and you're getting a headphone jack on this particular iPhone as well, which is a really cool thing to have. I think if I'm going through it, if I'm buying some sort of iPhone, I like the fact that this thing does actually have the lightning port and a headphone jack, because 2 years, 3 years after this, they basically removed it on all iPhones, but it's still kind of nice to have it on this particular device. On the back side, this is where things are getting a little wonky. So you did have that plastic back on this particular iPhone, which could be kind of a downside for some people. Now, this was kind of the big reason why I think Apple chose the C lineup, was to make it a cheaper iPhone. But I genuinely also don't think that was the best idea, because they quickly removed this iPhone, but then they brought back the iPhone SE lineup almost in the way that they should have made it back then. Now, with this particular iPhone, it's kind of what you'd expect, build quality wise, single camera setup on the back. Some big things that this phone does not have that the average phone in 2024 has. This phone does not have wireless charging, no IP certification, not a great camera, no multiple camera setups, no USB-C, that's missing out on a lot of things that a lot of phones have nowadays. But for how old this phone is, we kind of get it, and I kind of see it, I guess, in the stain. So from that particular perspective on the exterior, that kind of covers it up here. Now, in terms of the camera side of things, in more detail, you are getting an 8 megapixel standard camera on the back and a 1.2 megapixel camera on the front. Now, with this type of camera, once again, it's a pretty average camera when it comes down to it. So in 2013, when this phone came out, this phone's camera actually wasn't that terrible. There wasn't really a lot of phones at the time that were filming 4K video, besides the Samsung phones. So this thing really wasn't that far behind, if I'm being honest. But the big thing here is that when it comes down to this particular device, it really wasn't that great of a camera. It's not a good camera nowadays. You can probably guess that. Having 1080p on the back and 720p on the front. That's a pretty average type of camera that you could even find on the most basic phones. And this is what happens when you're buying these types of older devices, is that you're just getting these phones that are significantly older, which can kind of cause problems. Because on one hand, you can be oh, the screen is fine on this phone, and the build quality of this on this phone is fine. But then you'll have a camera that looks like this, which can be kind of a problem. And sometimes you can say the performance is fine, but then the display is terrible, and it's just so many different things. So when you're going back this far on a device, device, you're just going to run into endless problems, and that's kind of what can end up happening with this type of product. So at the end of the day, the camera really isn't doing you any favors, and that kind of is a problem when it comes down to it as well. Now, in terms of software and longevity, I mean, what else is there to say here? This phone has been unsupported with software for a long period of time. This phone has not gotten a software update in so many years. And I think there was a time where like in 2019, this phone randomly got an update. And even then, I mean, this thing was like outdated. So even if you consider 2019, this thing has been outdated for like 5 years now minimum. So, I mean, like I said, take it as you will. But this phone it's been old for a long period of time, and it just doesn't make any sense to go and buy this phone from that particular perspective either. What is the point of buying a phone like this if you're just already going to be outdated and you're not going to get any features of any updates in the future? So even security updates, everything like that, you're missing out on this particular product and you're missing out on this particular device. So this in and of itself is going to be a sad thing. Once again, I probably wouldn't recommend buying this phone anyway, but especially now that this phone is not going to be giving you any software or security updates, it makes this phone even less appealing to me to recommend to people when it comes down to it. So take that as you will as well, but that's another thing to keep in mind too. Now, in the performance side of things, this device is going to be giving you that Apple A6 chip inside with 1 GB of RAM. Now, once again, very average type of performance from this type of device. So if you are going through and buying this type of iPhone, this is a very average performing phone. I will say because it is on such an outdated version of software, it can kind of give you this experience that, oh, it's like, a different type of phone, or it's like because it has the hardware of a 2013 phone, and this thing stopped getting software updates in like 2018 or something like that. It's surprising because this thing doesn't seem super slow, but definitely when you're loading into applications and you're loading games and you're loading that kind of stuff, even like turning on this phone, I feel like in some ways is a kind of a slow experience. So once again, I would probably hate to recommend a phone to people if you're already going to feel like you have an outdated device when it comes down to it, and that is essentially what's going on with this particular phone. I would say the average iPhone nowadays has like 3 to 4 gigabytes of RAM minimum. You could take a look at the iPhone SE 2 and the iPhone XR. Those, I think, are the only iPhones that have 3 gigabytes of RAM left that are supported with software. So once again, why would you want to go ahead and buy this type of iPhone if you're already, unsupported with software and having a very low amount of, RAM and a very old chipset? So when it comes down to it, you can definitely tell that by the way my voice is sounding, this type of iPhone just really isn't worth it to the average person. You are so much better off purchasing an iPhone that is still even somewhat supported. So think of iPhones like the iPhone XR and above. The iPhone 5C is just too old of an iPhone to buy. It makes no sense to buy this iPhone, and you're just, like I said, better off purchasing an iPhone that is still supported with software. And I would hate for you to go and buy this type of iPhone if it's already done getting software support, and that is kind of what's going on with this type of device. So take it as you will, but that's kind of how I see the iPhone 5C in 2024. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that will mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.